at the very time that the government is saying productivity is the main game. It's the big problem. If we want to improve our living standards, we need to improve productivity. Why, at this particular point, would the government be choosing to cut spending to the CSIRO? It's madness.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows. I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, I'm Ebony Bennett and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. Australia has a proud record of scientific discoveries, and the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, better known as the CSIRO, has been at the centre of them. Fast Wi-Fi, extended wear contact lenses, the Hendra virus vaccine, and my personal favourite, Aerogard. All developed out of Australia's National Science Agency, but it's been a really tough time at the CSIRO.
It's responsible for cutting-edge research, but today the CSIRO is staring down major cuts of its own.
1,168 jobs axed, 818 already, now another 350.
This is an important part of the CSIRO, making sure that it is fit for purpose and it's got a modern, forward-looking science agenda.
But the organisation's chief says funding pressure is forcing it to rationalise.
Over the last 40 years, our investment in R&D as a nation has declined in a way that's very worrying.
You can't say that you're serious about tackling the big challenges we face and then cut science funding.
While the government shakes the tree at Treasury for $365 billion for submarines that we'll probably never get, $15 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies, and even $600 million for a rugby team, up to 350 jobs at the CSIRO are going. That's on top of over 800 jobs cut over the last 18 months. Before we start, the latest book from Australia Institute Press is available for pre-order now. A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, features essays from Yanis Varoufakis, Senator Fatima Payman, John Hewson, Craig Foster, Amy Romakis, Barry Cassidy, and more. The essays examine what bravery looks like in Australia today and how it can reshape our future for the better. Usually available for just $35.99, use the code SAVE5 at checkout to save $5. This offer is available for a limited time only. Pre-order it now to get it in time for Christmas at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes. Joining me today to talk about the CSIRO and the government spending priorities is Australia Institute senior economist Matt Grudnoff. G'day, Matt.
G'day, Eb. Thanks for chatting with me.
So, Matt, there's been a lot of news about the CSIRO funding and what's happening there at the moment. What's the latest on what's happening at our National Science Agency?
Well, the Science Agency, as you said, has been going through a rough time. Basically, what governments have been doing, the current Labor government and the previous coalition government, is they have been basically not increasing the funding to the CSIRO. I think over the last 15 years, on average, its funding has increased by just 1.5%. But the cost of doing science, so paying wages, paying rent, paying the upkeep of buildings, utilities, all that kind of stuff, has been increasing at 3 or 4%. And so what's effectively been happening is the CSIRO has not been able to continue to do the amount of science that it has in the past.
And essentially what this has led to, the most tangible result of this is that jobs have been going at the CSIRO. Is that right?
That's right. And look, the government has been trying to spin this. There's no other word. They have been really spinning hard. And what they've said is this isn't job cuts. This isn't us choosing to do less science, which it absolutely is. What they've been saying instead is we're refocusing the CSIRO. We're refocusing on priority areas of science and we're shuffling things around. But the reality is, as the job cuts kind of detail, 800 over the last 18 months, up to 350 just coming up, is that they're choosing to do less science. At the very time when we should be doing more science, when we're talking about productivity and issues like that, where we should be focused on how to make things better, at that exact moment in time, the government has decided, you know what, we should do less science.
So, yeah, obviously it's hard to do more science with 1,000 less scientists, effectively.
Exactly right. And look, we're talking about more than 10% of the workforce of the CSIRO. So it's a massive cut to their workforce. And look, they're doing crazy things like they're saying, well, we're going to refocus. And they've given us a number of areas that they're going to refocus into. And one of them, for example, is biosecurity. An area that is very important, but they're also cutting jobs in the biosecurity research area. One of the other focuses areas is climate change and being more resilient to the climate change that's happening. But guess what? They're cutting jobs in the environmental research area. So effectively, even in the areas where they say they want to focus on them in the future, they're also the areas, like the rest of the CSIRO, that is getting cut. Agriculture is another great example. The CSIRO has a long history of doing a lot of really good work producing, say, drought-resistant strains of wheat and things like that so that we can be more productive. Guess what? They're cutting the agricultural research area. So while they say they're refocusing, and look, certainly maybe they are, they're also cutting jobs in those very areas that they're talking about refocusing in.
Obviously, people would be concerned about the loss of research capacity, specifically people, out of our National Science Agency.
That takes the job losses to more than that happened under the Abbott government, which is pretty extraordinary.
Some of the driest of the driest minds within the sphere of government, notably Treasury and Finance, do view these things as a cost.
Under the Labor government, in real terms, CSIRO's funding has gone down 7%. That is a huge problem.
If you do value science, you need to stop looking at it, science and research, as a cost, see it as an investment in the future wellbeing and capability of the country.
Yeah, so the CSIRO Staff Association have said that these cuts are basically worse than those under the Abbott government. Staff numbers fell by more than 650 under the coalition governments. What do we know about the agency's funding levels over time, Matt?
Yeah, so what governments love to tell you is that they have record funding for such and such. In this case, they've got record funding for the CSIRO. And they're not actually lying, but they're not actually telling you the whole truth either. So as I said before, they have been increasing the CSIRO's funding by very small amounts, not enough to keep up with basically the cost of doing science. And so what they're able to do is say, well, it was actually slightly higher than last time, so it's more funding. But if you look at it as a percentage of the economy, which is a common way of doing it, which basically strips out those problems of, well, you're not keeping up, we actually see that CSIRO funding is at record lows, and it's fallen quite considerably. In fact, it's fallen so far, it's below the levels that when the Abbott government. Now, if you remember back, about 15 years now, maybe a little bit less, 12 years ago, the Abbott government came in, they had a massive slash and burn. Tony Abbott, not known for his love of funding science and funding universities and funding research in general, took a meat axe to it. Now, today, the Albanese Labor government is giving less funding as a proportion of the economy to the CSIRO than Tony Abbott did about 12 or 13 years ago.
That's pretty damning, isn't it?
It is very damning.
So, Matt, you were talking just before about the cuts in specific areas and how that might impact productivity. What are the benefits of investing in research and development of the kind that the CSIRO works on, and how does it impact on productivity overall?
Yeah, so productivity is about producing things in a smarter way, to be able to produce more stuff with the same amount of resources. And the main way you do that is through technological innovation. Australia's productivity, it's been quite low recently. The government has talked about how it's one of the major priorities of this government is to increase productivity.
And the best way to think about the difference between our first term and the second term that we won last night, first term was primarily inflation without forgetting productivity. The second term will be primarily productivity without forgetting inflation.
So you would think that at a time when they want to increase productivity, we would actually see more funding into research and development. So it's kind of doubly strange that this is the time the government is deciding to continue to slash funding. And look, let's be very, very clear. Australia it's not just the CSIRO where governments fund science in Australia, but if you look at all the funding towards research and development and science, and you compare it to other rich countries, right? Our peer countries, what we call the OECD countries. Out of 35 rich countries, 35 OECD countries, Australia ranks 27th, 8th last. We fund science and research and development really badly in this country from the government. And at the same time, the private sector is also not investing in research and development. So you have this double whammy where neither the government nor the business sector are investing. And if they don't invest, then how are we going to make new discoveries and able to produce more? So I used the example earlier of drought-resistant crops like wheat or barley or whatever it happens to be. As the climate changes, as we dry out in this continent, we are going to need those kind of breakthroughs in order to be able to continue to produce what we are now with less resources, less water. But, that's just one example. There are all kinds of different examples. Even things like biosecurity, which you might not think is about productivity. The fact is, if we can keep pests and diseases out, and we have in Australia really, really successfully.
Benefits of being an island.
Exactly right. But by doing that, we effectively have created a situation where we don't have these pests, so we don't have lost crops from these pests, and we're able to sell our produce at a premium. So again, a really important area. But, even things like, the CSIRO famously came up with Wi-Fi. They famously come up with all sorts of technological advances. This is an area where Australia can get ahead. It can become more productive at the very time that the government is saying, and economists are saying, productivity is the main game. It's the big problem. If we want to improve our living standards, we need to improve productivity. So look, why at this particular point would the government be choosing to cut spending to the CSIRO? It's madness.
Yeah, especially when productivity is kind of one of the key things that the government has said is one of its priorities.
I mean, we had the productivity roundtable. They've commissioned the Productivity Commission to produce 5 reports on key pillars of productivity. After the election, the Treasurer said the first term was all about inflation with an eye on productivity, and this second term was going to be all about productivity with an eye on inflation. He clearly staked out that productivity was the area that he was most interested in. And then the biggest area of possible productivity gain, the area that the government can do the most. And let's be clear, the government's not the only one in charge of productivity. Private business has a huge role to play, but the government is limited in what it can do in that area. But the area that it can make a big difference, it's cutting funding.
So Prime Minister Albanese has said that, quote, we're friends of science and that the cuts are about making sure that every single dollar for scientific research is going in the right direction. I mean, is that accurate?
Well, he's confusing two things, as politicians are wont to do, right? He's confusing the idea of the efficiency of how we spend, which is absolutely something governments should be focused on and absolutely something the CSIRO itself should be focused on. It should be constantly reviewing with the government what are the areas we should be focusing on funding. What kind of research is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, right? Absolutely, that's a worthy thing to do. But he's conflating and joining that with these cuts. The idea that, I know how we'll make us more productive. We'll do less science. We'll do less research. We will fund less research projects. We will employ less scientists. And somehow that magically produces more research. Like, it's just silly. Yes, we should always be focusing on what we should research. But no, that doesn't have to come with budget cuts. That could just come with the government coming in and going, okay, you've done this review and you've said this should be the areas. We want to see how you're refocusing. You're deciding to do less research in these areas, and we want you to move those people or hire different people to work more on these other priority areas, right? So when you hear politicians and the Prime Minister say, this isn't about budget cuts, well, the question is, if it's not about budget cuts, why is the CSIRO losing staff at such a huge rate? Why did it lose 800 people over the last 18 months? Why will it lose 350 people in the coming years? If this is about doing more science, that seems pretty weird.
Just listen to some of the appalling waste we have already identified. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $8 million for making mice transgender. This is real. Many more have been found out and exposed and swiftly terminated by a group of very intelligent, mostly young people, headed up by Elon, and we appreciate it. We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
And Matt, I would have thought, it'd be the perfect time to be scooping up some international talent, because the Trump administration's policies are certainly driving researchers and scientific research out of the United States. It's almost mind-boggling that we'd be sacking people at the same time as other countries are kind of racing to scoop up that global talent.
Yeah, look, I mean, as far as not liking science, we talked a bit about Tony Abbott. Well, Trump is Tony Abbott on steroids, right? He has taken a meat axe through his, DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency sort of cuts, and he's cut $3 billion US out of direct science funding, and he has basically axed 3,800 grants across the US to do research. And what does that mean? Well, it means all these US institutions, these really prestigious places, are letting staff go. So what does that mean for the rest of the world? It means that all these really talented scientists are suddenly looking for a job somewhere else. This is exactly the time when we should be increasing funding, because we have an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity, to take advantage of America dropping the ball effectively, scoop up these talented scientists and have them work for us to help us improve our productivity. Instead, again, at this, instead of taking advantage of this fantastic opportunity, we are instead cutting science. We're letting go of our own. We're going to let another 350 of our scientists go. Exactly right. We're dropping the ball in exactly the same way the US is doing. And, look, this is going to have profound long-term effects on the standard of living of all Australians. Productivity is what allows your real wage, the wage after inflation, to rise. It means that everybody can purchase more stuff, all right? They can have more things. And if we neglect it, if we ignore it, if we actively sabotage it, the way that we're doing with these cuts to the CSIRO, all that is going to mean is that we will not be as prosperous in the future.
Yet we're still able to subsidise fossil fuels to the tune of $14 billion a year, roughly. I mean, what could the government be doing instead? And what does it really mean for the Australian economy, as you mentioned, if we continue nickel and diming research like this?
Well, it means lower productivity. It means lower economic growth. It means lower real wages. It means that we won't be as prosperous. That's what it means to nickel and dime these kind of areas. And let's be clear. If we continue to make these kind of incremental cuts, and let's be clear again, what the government is cleverly doing, this government and the last government, because they don't want to sort of slash the budget, they're just not increasing it by nearly enough every year. So they're able to always say record funding this year for the CSIRO, even though we can see from the fact that it keeps laying off workers, right? I mean, the major budget expenditure of organisations like the CSIRO, organisations that do research, is wages, obviously. It's the people doing the research. And so if you're laying off workers as you go along, then obviously you are doing less research. And that's what is happening to the CSIRO. And it's happening across Australia. I said earlier that we ranked 27th in the OECD out of 35 countries. So we're right near the bottom. If we were to somehow increase funding, we would have to increase it by a total of $10 billion just to get up to the OECD average, just to be an average country. $10 billion a year in additional funding. I've actually talked about this in an article I've just written that we've put up on our new website, The Point. And if you want to go to The Point, thepoint.com.au, you can click on the article I've written that goes into exactly how bad Australia is at funding science and how we compare to the rest of the world, and how we could take advantage of the Trump cuts and why funding science so badly is such a missed opportunity for Australia.
Yeah, so people can head on over to thepoint.com.au to check that out. But Matt, you also wrote about this week, you mentioned there real wages, and you've been explaining why workers might not be feeling the benefits of decent wage growth. So can you tell us a little bit more about what is going on with wages in the broader economy?
Yeah, so economics is full of statistics, most of which most people find boring and confusing, which is completely understandable. But how much your wage increases isn't the most important thing. That might seem weird, but basically what I mean is wages could be rising quite fast, but if inflation is rising even faster, then there's a thing called your real wage, economists call your real wage, and that would be going backwards. So imagine your wage went up by 5% in a year. That's a big increase, right? But if all the stuff you were buying went up in price by 10%, you can actually buy less stuff, right? Your wage hasn't kept up. But if your wage was only rising by, say, 2% a year, that's pretty slow, but the stuff you were buying was only increasing by 1%, then your real wage would actually be increasing. So the latest wage data showed that wages were up 3.4%. It's pretty reasonable. It's about average, about where the long-term average is. It's not spectacular, but also it's not bad. The problem is that inflation has increased over the last year by 3.2%, almost the same as wages. So while people might be hearing, wages are up 3.4%, that's, close to the long-term average, people should be feeling a lot better and a lot happier. The reason that they're not, the reason that they're still struggling is because their real wages haven't really changed much at all. They've basically stayed still over the last year. And that's because we've had this kind of spike in inflation. Now, the good news is that a lot of this spike, this recent sort of uptick in inflation, is almost certainly temporary. It's to do with the government, particularly state governments at the moment, phasing out electricity subsidies. So the price consumers are facing is going up, and that's pushing up inflation. But what it means is we kind of expect inflation to fall back down. So if wages continue to grow at about 3.5% or around that level, then people's real wages should start to pick up. But right now, over the last 12 months, people probably aren't feeling a lot better off than, or certainly not as much as you would expect if you saw your wages rise by about 3.4% because we've seen that spike in inflation.
So, Matt, we are in the final federal parliament of the year, although I guess there's always that chance that they can extend sitting hours, as they sometimes do.
Yep.
But what more can the government be doing to lift living standards, in your opinion?
Well, as I said, productivity is important because it gets those real wages higher. But there's probably a number of really important areas. I think in particular, electricity prices are a big issue at the moment. And I think that is mainly, we know that electricity prices is actually driven by gas prices. If you look at the change in electricity prices over time and the change in gas prices over time, they run almost in identical ways, right? And that's because gas basically sets the electricity price. And that's why, we've got this insane debate at the political level at the moment where people are saying, well, we need more gas. Well, gas is the thing that's making electricity prices increase.
It's driving the price.
We want more
increases.
of the thing that's making electricity prices go up. What we actually need to do is we need less gas, all right? We need more renewables to push out gas or make the role of gas so much smaller so that electricity prices come down. So certainly one of the ways we could do that is to transition away from gas. That will help electricity prices. The other thing is housing. Housing is another huge issue that we've seen that affects people's cost of living. Whether you rent or you pay a mortgage, at the moment, you're feeling a lot of sting from those rapidly increasing prices. And look, we've talked about this before. The way you stop that is you need to stop investors flooding into the market and pushing house prices up, taking advantage of those big tax concessions, the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. So if I was the government, I would be focusing on the rollout of renewable energy and trying to reduce the role of gas in setting the electricity price. And I would be getting rid of the capital gains tax discount and cracking down on negative gearing, and that will help make housing more affordable. Those two things together will improve the long-term well-being of households by reducing areas that are currently really squeezing their budgets.
Well, thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
And just a reminder that you can save $5 off our latest book, A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, with the code SAVE5 at checkout for a limited time only. Pre-order it now to get it in time for Christmas at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes.
And if I can just put another ad in for The Point, thepoint.com.au, if you want to hear more about these CSIRO cuts and how they're impacting it, I've written an article that'll be up there right now. You can click on and you can read more.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matt. This episode was recorded on Wednesday, the 26th of November, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.